last few years of Ellen White's life, she really did not do much traveling. She saved what strength she had to help her work with her secretaries to produce the books that she was authoring. But occasionally, the administrators of Pacific Union College, which was at the top of the mountain above the house where she lived at Elmshaven, you took a little winding road, you went up Howell Mountain to Pacific Union College. The administrators up there at the school wanted the students to hear Ellen White. And so they would invite her to come up and speak for chapel. Now, she did not accept very often, but occasionally she would go up. And one of the people that was there that listened to her told me about one of those occasions. Ellen White did not speak long. She was very elderly, but she talked to the young people about when she was a young girl, she had put on the whole armor of God, and she'd never taken it off. And she encouraged the students to do the same. Put on the whole armor of God and never take it off. Now, Ellen White would usually travel up the night before. She would stay overnight in the girls' dorm. They had a room where she would stay. And then if she was going to speak for chapel, she would remain. And then after the noon meal, she would go back down to her home down the hill to Elmshaven. On one occasion, at least, when she was there for lunch after speaking for the chapel, why, when Ellen White came into the dining room that day, the person that told me this story said everything stopped. You know how it is when some famous politician comes around, everybody wants to know what's that person doing, and so everybody's stretching and straining, trying to see what's going on over there. And this lady told me, she said it was no different. Sister White and her group came in, and everybody's straining and stretching, trying to see what's going on over there. Well, they got seated, and Ellen White liked to have greens with her meals. These could be salad greens, they could be dandelion greens or tender mustard shoots. She liked greens. And for whatever reason, they were serving no greens that day. Now, Ellen White had a lady that lived with her, lived in the house with her, and had been with her for many, many years, 20 or 30 years by this time. Her name was Miss Sarah McInturfer. Now, Miss McInturfer ran the house, especially the last few years. She ran Elmshaven. For instance, if you had wanted to see Ellen White and you arrived at Elmshaven and you did not have an appointment, you did not get by Miss McInturfer. Her room was right in the front, right by the front door, and you did not get to go up those stairs to where Ellen White's writing room was if you didn't have an appointment. She was an interesting lady. She was an interesting lady, let me tell you. From things I've been told about her, she was very stern, very firm, knew what she was doing. The grandchildren, several of them told me how much they loved Auntie Sarah, as they called her, and then proceeded to tell me stories about her, which made me wonder how much they really loved her. But anyway, so on this particular day, here's Sarah McInturfer. She's one of these take charge, in control people, and she noticed there's no greens. So what do you do if you have that kind of personality? Well, immediately she marches herself back into the kitchen area. And before long, she comes out with this bowl of greens for Ellen White, while everybody's sitting there staring and trying to see what's going on over there. And Ellen White said to her, "Sarah, I really could have gotten along without my greens on one occasion." And Sarah, who must have had a deep voice, because people quoted her, would lower their voice a notch, said, "Well, Mother." Now, she wasn't related to Ellen White, but she lived with her so long. She called her mother. She said, "Well, Mother, there's no need to deprive yourself." And with that, Ellen White had her greens. Just one of these little incidents. There was another time when Ellen and Sarah had an interesting exchange. It was down at Elmshaven, though. Sarah came in at a noon meal bringing some greens to Ellen White, and she presented them to Ellen White and said, "Well, Mother, here's your horse feed." Well, there was a young man there who had just started working for Ellen White, later married Ellen White's granddaughter, actually. Anyway, he was aghast, speaking to the prophet like that. "Well, Mother, here's your horse feed," giving her these greens. And Ellen White said, "Well, I don't see that my horse feed is any different than your cow peas." And she looked over at a bowl of cow peas. So, there was good rapport between the two ladies, but Sarah was an interesting person. She used to tell the grandchildren, "Now run along, grandchildren. Run along, children. Now, you know your grandmother's busy today. She doesn't have time for you. Well, what do grandmothers like? They like to be with their grandchildren. And what do grandchildren like? They like to be with their grandmother. So Sarah's out here in the front of the house by the front door. She's making certain nobody interrupts Ellen White, but there was a back door to Elm Savin. So one of the grandchildren told me, she said, you know, we found out that we could sneak in the back door if we opened it very quietly, and we could go up the little back stairway that opened right into our grandmother's writing room. And they all knew Ellen White was busy and important. I mean, they didn't understand the full ramifications of her ministry as a child, or as children, but they knew that it was important, whatever it was. And later, of course, they came to understand about her being the prophetic messenger. But they wanted to see Grandma. So they'd worked out a little deal with her grandmother. She would be writing or whatever she was doing, but when she would lay her pen down, that was a sign. And they would scamper across the room and climb up on her lap, and she'd give them a big hug and a kiss. And she might say to them something like, remember, your name is White. You must always keep it that way. Or another thing they remembered her saying was, there's a heaven to win and a hell to shun. And she might tell them about some chicks that had hatched or a new calf that had been born, some little thing. They would be there maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, not very long, and they would scamper back downstairs quietly. In fact, one of them told me that they even remembered there was one step, one wooden board in the steps, that if they stepped in a certain place, it would squeak. So they knew to step on the other side, because they didn't want Auntie Sarah out there in the front to know they were in there. And they would sneak out the back door, and guess what? Grandma's happy, the grandkids are happy, and who else was happy? Auntie Sarah. Sarah McInturfer. She didn't know anything had happened. She thought she was doing her job well. So it's just some insights into the White household.